You know, they were talking about climate change yesterday, and now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right. Lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning. CBS This Morning contributor Michio Kaku is a physics professor at City College of New York. Professor, nice to see you. Extraordinary seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton there together with Charlie, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, they did not get into this discussion, though. But it is fascinating. I mean, lasers, really, to change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it. Well, instead of doing a rain dance, we physicists are firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky to actually precipitate rain clouds and actually bring down lightning bolts. This is potentially a game changer.
But this is experimental.
It's experimental. However, in the laboratory so far it works. When you have water vapor and you have dust particles or ice crystals, you can precipitate rain. It condenses around the seeds. These seeds can also be created by laser beams. By firing trillion-watt lasers, you rip apart the electrons, creating what are called ions, and these ions act like seeds, like dust particles, bringing down rain and even lightning.
Go ahead.
Well, this fascinates me in part because, too, I remember reading the stories that China had used this during the Olympics, that the USSR had used this after Chernobyl to create rain clouds. I mean, did those really work then? We have some of these capabilities now?
Inconclusive. Even in the 60s, the CIA used this to bring down monsoons during the Vietnam War, to wash out the Viet Cong. Governments have been playing with this thing.
Alleged to.
Alleged to, right.
Yeah.
Now, we realize that for decades now, these governments have been alleged to have experimented with weather control, but nothing conclusive. This time we're bringing in the laws of physics rather than simply waving our hands and uttering mumbo-jumbo. We're actually using trillion-watt lasers now. And in the laboratory, sure enough, they precipitate rain out of water vapor. Sure enough, you can actually bring down electricity down the beam.
So what does it mean for drought areas that need to have rain for crops, and if they don't have them, there's the consequences of famine?
Well, the bad news is if it's a clear blue sky, it's not going to do anything at all, because it only takes water vapor that's already in the air and condenses it. However, for floods, for agriculture, farmers, for people planning wedding parties, football games, you name it, outdoor events and agriculture and flooding and even hurricanes, all of them could be subject to weather modification.
Incredibly interesting, Professor Michio Kaku. Thank you so much.
We're firing trillion-watt lasers into the sky, top scientist admits to weather modification on CBS. Respected physicist, Dr. Michio Kaku, exposes the science of geoengineering to the mainstream masses in a CBS interview. By J. Sermopoulos, September 12, 2017. In the aftermath of the devastation wrought by Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma, and Hurricane Jose brewing in the Atlantic, many people are looking for answers as to the increasingly volatile weather being witnessed. And while climate change is one potential cause, there are other lesser-known activities that could potentially be playing a role in the manifestation of these weather anomalies. While weather modification and geoengineering are still somewhat taboo subjects to the mainstream, often considered to be in the realm of conspiracy theory, there is a significant body of academic research and science that confirms that these technologies not only exist but are being operationalized. No, the Free Thought Project is not claiming the government, nor anyone else is making hurricanes or actively controlling the weather. We are only presenting this information because it exists and people should be aware that it exists. In a segment aired on CBS in 2013, respected scientist Dr. Michio Kaku, a physics professor at City College of New York, discussed, with Charlie Rose and Nora O'Donnell, the science of weather manipulation. Advertisement. During the interview, Kaku, in discussing the experiments with weather modification, notes that we're shooting trillion-watt lasers into the sky, referencing the use of lasers to induce changes to naturally occurring weather phenomena. Later in the conversation, Kaku briefly touches on the history of weather modification that has been carried out for decades by the government, with the CBS hosts quickly interrupting him to note these programs were only alleged. Of course, these hosts must be ignorant of the declassified history of Operation Popeye, which was a weather manipulation program enacted during the Vietnam War as a means of creating ongoing monsoon conditions in an effort to impede the Viet Cong's mobility in the region. This is no conspiracy theory. In fact, research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences specifically notes that laser beams create plasma channels in air, which in turn, cause ice to form. Read more, it's here. Geoengineering now normalized as scientists spray chemicals to dim the sun, soak up CO2. Professor Jean-Pierre Wolf and Dr. Jerome Kasparian, both biophotonics experts at the University of Geneva, actually organized a conference at the World Meteorological Organization to discuss how powerful laser pulses can be used to generate changes in the atmosphere that influence the weather. Wolf and Kasparian said, under the conditions of a typical storm cloud, in which ice and supercooled water coexist, no direct influence of the plasma channels on ice formation or precipitation processes could be detected. Under conditions typical for thin cirrus ice clouds, however, the plasma channels induced a surprisingly strong effect of ice multiplication. Within a few minutes, the laser action led to a strong enhancement of the total ice particle number density in the chamber by up to a factor of 100, even though only a 10⁹ fraction of the chamber volume was exposed to the plasma channels. The newly formed ice particles quickly reduced the water vapor pressure to ice saturation, thereby increasing the cloud optical thickness by up to 3 orders of magnitude. Adding credence to the idea of scientists using geoengineering technology to manipulate the weather, according to the MIT Technology Review. A pair of Harvard climate scientists are preparing small-scale atmospheric experiments that could offer insights into the feasibility and risks of deliberately altering the climate to ease global warming. They would be among the earliest official geoengineering-related experiments conducted outside of a controlled laboratory or computer model, underscoring the growing sense of urgency among scientists to begin seriously studying the possibility as the threat of climate change mounts. Sometime next year, Harvard professors David Keith and Frank Kuch hope to launch a high-altitude balloon, tethered to a gondola equipped with propellers and sensors, from a site in Tucson, Arizona. After initial engineering tests, the Stratocruiser would spray a fine mist of materials such as sulfur dioxide, alumina, or calcium carbonate into the stratosphere. The sensors would then measure the reflectivity of the particles, the degree to which they disperse or coalesce, and the way they interact with other compounds in the atmosphere. Another top American climate researcher, Professor Alan Rambosk from Rutgers, says that the CIA is looking into weather modification as a form of warfare. Read more. Largest evacuation in FLA history underway as Irma threatens 2 nuclear plants. As reported in The Independent, a senior American climate scientist has spoken of the fear he experienced when U.S. intelligence services apparently asked him about the possibility of weaponizing the weather, as a major report on geoengineering is to be published this week. Professor Alan Rambosk stated that 3 years ago, 2 men claiming to be from the CIA had called him to ask whether experts would be able to tell if hostile forces had begun manipulating the US weather, though he suspected the purpose of the call was to find out if American forces could meddle with other countries' climates instead. During a debate on the use of geoengineering to combat climate change, at the annual meeting of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in San Jose, California, Professor Rambosk said, "I got a phone call from 2 men who said we work as consultants for the CIA and we'd like to know if some other country was controlling our climate, would we know about it? I told them, after thinking a little bit, that we probably would, because if you put enough material in the atmosphere to reflect sunlight we would be able to detect it and see the equipment that was putting it up there. At the same time I thought they were probably also interested in if we could control somebody else's climate, could they detect it?" Professor Rambosk, who has investigated the potential risks and benefits of using stratospheric particles to simulate the climate-changing effects of volcanic eruptions, said he felt scared when the approach was made. "I'd learned of lots of other things the CIA had done that haven't followed the rules, and I thought that wasn't how I wanted my tax money spent. I think this research has to be in the open and international so there isn't any question of it being used for hostile purposes." Professor Rambosk's concerns come as a major report on geoengineering is to be published this week by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. Among the report's list of sponsors is the U.S. intelligence community, which includes NASA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the U.S. Department of Energy. The professor alleges that the CIA told a colleague of his that it wanted to fund the report, but claimed that it did not want this fact to be too obvious. He added that the CIA is a major funder of the report, which makes me really worried about who is going to be in control. He claimed the U.S. government had a proven history of using the weather in a hostile way, citing the action of seeding clouds during the Vietnam War to muddy the Ho Chi Minh Foot Trail and attempt to cut it off, as it was used as a supply route by the North Vietnamese. He claimed the CIA had also seeded clouds over Cuba to make it rain and ruin the sugar harvest. While certain powerful constituencies are well aware of the extremely powerful forces that can be unleashed through weather modification technology, these same groups would like to keep the general public unaware of these technologies and programs. Read more. As thousands left homeless from hurricanes, Trump sends $75 million more to Israel. Whether these recent weather phenomena may, or may not, have anything to do with weather manipulation technology, make no mistake that weather modification is a real and practiced science, and is no conspiracy theory. Listen to Dr. Michio Kaku briefly explain the reality of scientific weather manipulation below.
Hey Charlotte County, this is Charlotte County COPWATCH, and I'd like to thank you for all your years of support through the years. As a result, this channel has grown and allowed me an equity partnership in carmarshal.com. Please take the time to check them out. They help you buy and sell your next car, even have a negotiating tool to save you from the hassle of haggling with multiple dealers. The link is in the description below. Please click and help support and give if you can too through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks again.